This is Chasing the Horizon, a podcast by, for, and about motorcyclists, brought to you by the BMW Motorcycle Owners of America. Welcome to episode 142, released on April 7th, 2023. I'm your host, Wes Fleming, and our guest this time is filmmaker Indy Saini. It's been a while, I know, but we're back with some new episodes. Thanks for your inquiries and your patience. Whether you know it or not, there's an elephant in the room when it comes to the motorcycle industry, or rather, there's a hog in the room, HOG being Harley-Davidson's NYSE ticker symbol. That's what passes for a joke here on Chasing the Horizon, folks. Anyway, Harley released its annual report for 2022 a little while ago, and the numbers are interesting, if not encouraging, and somewhat interesting. I said interesting twice. That should tell you how interesting it really is. So let's dig in a little. In 2020, which you might remember as the year everything changed thanks to COVID-19, Harley sold 180,248 motorcycles, one of their worst showings in a non-recession year for a while. They followed that in 2021 with about 8% growth, selling 194,256 motorcycles worldwide. A vast majority of those sales, almost 70% of them, were in North America, and 94% of those sales were in the USA. By the way, Harley doesn't consider Mexico as part of North America for its sales reporting purposes. Mexico, they group with Latin America. All those gains from 2020 to 2021 were wiped out in 2022. That's a lot of 20s. When Harley sold just 178,451 motorcycles worldwide. Now, that's a 1% decrease from lockdown-horrific 2020, which wouldn't seem like a big deal, but it was a 7.7% drop from 2021, in which things looked up. Now, the percentage of bikes they sold in North America versus the rest of the world decreased to 65.5% of the total, but the number of those sold in the US stayed basically the same at 93%. Okay, let's recap just a little because that's a lot of numbers. Harley sales in 2020 were decent considering the widespread pandemic lockdowns. They went up in 2021, but in 2022 dropped to pre-pandemic levels. From an earnings perspective, Harley's net income in 2020 was $1.3 million, and it rose to $650 million in 2021. Now, there's a lot of reasons for that because, taking care of debt and a whole bunch of other things. But despite the dismal motorcycle sales figures in 2022, their net income last year rose to $741.4 million, which is a pretty good return. One of the really telling things you can glean from Harley's annual reports is insight into why they split LiveWire off into its own company. The electric division cost Harley $68.2 million in losses in 2021, and that rose to $85.3 million in losses in 2022. Anyway, the company speculated on why sales dropped so deeply in 2022, and here I'm quoting from their annual report. Retail sales were adversely impacted by low dealer inventory levels during the 2022 riding season, following the company's suspension of production and shipments for approximately 2 weeks during the second quarter of 2022. End quote. What they're saying there, in many words, is something we've all heard from lots of companies over the past couple years: supply chain problems. I reported in a previous episode that the supply chain problems were bad enough to cause Harley to shut down their production temporarily, and they certainly weren't the only company caught flat-footed by supply chain woes, and definitely not the only motorcycle manufacturer. I think it's a tiny bit disingenuous to blame a whole year's performance on a 2-week gap in production, but I'm not running one of these companies, and I don't know how much of that is spin and how much of that is fact. I only know what's in the report. At any rate, the only region in which Harley sales rose in 2022 was what they call Asia Pacific, which saw an 11.5 increase in sales from 21 to 22. Now, there was a corresponding drop in new motorcycle registrations in the US and Europe as well, with about a 6% reduction across the board from 21 to 22. I find it very interesting that Harley always includes the number of new registrations because what they're trying to do is show their market share, which is a really cool thing to be able to see. And I would like to note that new motorcycle registrations in the U.S. were just 65% as numerous as the number of new registrations filed in Europe in 2022, which says a lot about how seriously Europeans take motorcycling as an everyday thing compared to most Americans who treat it as a luxury or a leisure activity. Now, piggybacking on those registration statistics are, of course, market share numbers. Harley continues to enjoy the lion's share of new registrations in the U.S. for any single brand, with just over 41% of the market. In other words, Harley is still doing well in the United States, but their days of owning more than 50% of the market in this country are definitely behind them. Now, numbers are just cold, hard facts, and without any context, they don't really make all that much sense. So let's give these Harley numbers a little context by comparing them to another set of cold, hard facts from 2022 from BMW. Now, according to BMW Group's report for 2022, they delivered 202,895 motorcycles worldwide in 2022. Yeah, more than Harley did. Let that sink in just a little bit. Now, that's fewer than they built. BMW manufactured almost 216,000 motorcycles, but only 202,895 were delivered to customers, which is as near as BMW is going to get for citing retail sales units, since what they're probably really reporting is sales to their dealers, but that's really kind of digging down into the weeds, and it can get a little confusing at that point. At any rate, in 2021, BMW sold 194,216 motorcycles, which was just 40 fewer than Harley-Davidson did in the same year. I'm sure that lit a fire under everybody in BMW's motorcycle division and at Harley as well, since in 2022, BMW only sold about 170,000, which was over 10,000 fewer than Harley did in that same lockdown year. But here we're looking at 2022 sales figures, and BMW is a company whose business is almost 92% car sales, and they sold almost 14% more motorcycles around the world than Harley-Davidson did. When it comes to U.S. sales figures, if we focus only there, of course, the news isn't quite as rosy for BMW, but there are certainly some excellent positives. First of all, let's rewind just a little bit. A few years back, BMW promoted a plan to sell 200,000 motorcycles worldwide by 2020. They missed it by a couple of years, but only just, since they almost hit that goal in 2021. Now, as you can probably understand, getting back to the markets, Europe remains BMW's biggest market for motorcycles. Germany, France, Italy, and Spain make up 36% of BMW sales, motorcycle sales. The big news from my perspective is the U.S. taking a big jump forward to overtake Italy as the number 3 market for BMW motorcycles. The U.S. captured 8.7% of BMW motorcycles global sales in 2022. Unfortunately, and kind of unlike some previous years, the annual report BMW published didn't give specific numbers for sales in those specific segments. They just gave percentages. So I had to do math, which is not really my favorite thing in the world to do. So I apologize if some of my numbers are off. I did use a calculator and not just pen and paper. So 8.7% of 202,895 units sold is 17,652. So that's how many motorcycles approximately BMW sold in the United States. According to Harley's numbers on new motorcycle registrations in the United States, that gives BMW about a 7% market share, which looks minuscule when it's next to Harley's 41% market share. But hey, they got time to grow. After all, BMW only captured about 18% of Europe's motorcycle market share, but Harley captured less than 7% of it. So at least there's that. Okay, let's wrap up the reporting of the numbers and boil it down here. BMW, a company 92% focused on car and SUV sales, sold almost 25,000 more motorcycles worldwide in 2022 than Harley-Davidson, which is 100% focused on motorcycle sales. I would argue that Harley-Davidson, with its 600 plus dealerships in the United States, can still claim a far better bed of customer support and service than BMW can, since BMW has fewer than 170 dealers in the United States and Canada. 146 of them, by my count, are in the USA, but that's a completely different discussion. There's also a wide base of independent mechanics that work on Harley-Davidsons, where the number of independent mechanics who will work on BMWs, especially new ones, seems to be getting smaller every year. But that's purely anecdotal. I don't have any hard numbers on that. Now, you can visit the show notes page for this episode to download your very own PDF copies of the annual reports published in February 2023 by both BMW and Harley-Davidson. I think it's really interesting to take a look at the different formats and to read all of the stuff that I'm not talking about, like their, manufacturing information about where their factories are and what their outputs are and all of the, really hard financial data. I don't understand a lot of it. As a matter of fact, I don't understand most of it, but it's interesting to see the trends over time. Another big difference between the two annual reports is that Harley only compares this year to last year as far as the report goes, where BMW will include numbers going back sometimes up to 5 or 6 years. So I don't know if that's a regulatory difference between the United States and Europe, but it is something that's very interesting. Before we get into the discussion with Indy, I want to tell you you'll be able to meet her in person at this year's BMW MOA National Rally, which is being held June 8th through the 10th, just outside Richmond, Virginia. She'll be giving a seminar and then hosting a screening of her film, both on Thursday, June 8th. Find out more about the rally. Get yourself registered to attend at rally.bmwmoa.org. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Chasing the Horizon. I'm here with Indy Saini, who is a filmmaker from California, I assume, because all filmmakers are from California.
I definitely live in California now. Yeah.
Well, welcome to the show. It's good to have you.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here and have a chat with you.
Now, obviously, before you started making films about motorcycles and the women who ride them, you started riding a motorcycle somewhere along in your life. And I'm always curious. I call it the origin story, because we're all a little bit superheroes, right? And we all start somewhere. So tell me a little bit about how you got involved in motorcycles, whether it was a family experience and, you kind of came up with it, or if you just kind of decided one day I'm going to go ride a motorcycle.
Well, I was definitely heavily influenced as a kid. I mean, I didn't realize it when I became an adult and started pursuing it myself. But my dad is from India. And when I was growing up, every 3 years, we would go and visit family there. And so my first experience on a motorcycle was with my older cousin when I was 7 years old. In India, like, it's a very common thing for families to have motorcycles. It's sort of like a family car. And so you can see like 4 people on a bike and, with their goat under one arm and, women on the back in saris riding side saddle, holding a baby. And it's completely common and completely natural. And, so there was like, nobody in my family was like, oh no, she's only 7. She can't go on that bike in her shorts and flip flops,
Right.
It was like so accepted. And so like, that's how he would take me swimming and, to the local pool and to the movies and stuff like that. So it just, I think from that very young age, just became something that was super comfortable and almost built into my DNA,
So did you try riding at that age, or were you just, kind of a passenger along for the ride?
I was totally a passenger. Like, it never, it wasn't like it was just sort of like transportation.
Right.
It wasn't like, we're going to go do this for fun and you should give it a try. And it was just like part of the culture. And it wasn't until I was in my early 20s and dating a guy who rode and he was a big adventure sportsman, skiing guy, and did paragliding and all kinds of stuff. And so I also was like adventurous spirit, but hadn't tried any of those things. And so that's when I learned to ride. And when that relationship ended, we had bought a bunch of stuff together, and I was like, you take everything. I just want the bike.
Nice.
And that's literally what I walked away from that relationship with, just the motorcycle.
Well, I think you got the high end of that deal. So, no complaints.
Absolutely.
So what was that bike that you walked away from the relationship with? Do you remember?
It was a 350 Suzuki Enduro.
Okay.
So it was like super tall. I mean, it's really kind of a easy bike to learn how to ride on, because I couldn't even have both of my tiptoes down at the same time. Like literally one set of tiptoes leaning to the side. But it was also like a super light bike, it had very, it's mostly air in there. So, I guess in a way it was a good bike to learn on, because I learned balance, without being able to, keep myself on balance with my feet. So it was good in that way.
Yeah.
And also it was, I was learning a little bit of off-roading too. So, that was part of my very original learning to ride, was being on gravel and a little bit of dirt and stuff like that with that bike.
So did that experience evoke anything from your childhood? Did you connect the things? Because I know often as, teenagers and young adults, we're kind of in our own world and we don't always make those connections to our childhood. Were you able to connect those two experiences in your head?
I didn't at the time. And I think just because I was so in the moment with it, and it was like, in a way, I was falling in love with it for the first time. But I'm sure that I was already in love with it, because the moment it became like an option, I was like, oh yes, I really want to do this.
Did you keep riding in that kind of mixed style, or did you gravitate more towards pure street riding?
I gravitated more towards street riding just because of, I always tend to live in cities.
Uh-huh.
And as a filmmaker, I travel a lot for my work. And so, I mean, in that sense, like sometimes that off-roading, those little bit of skills that I did have were helpful, because I would be in some country that was, I was in Nepal at one point, and, the roads are pretty torn up.
Yep.
So it might be on road, but you're really pretty off road, just on the main road, So those skills always played in, but I tended to be more of like a cruiser style rider.
Gotcha. So what other bikes made their way through your garage or on the curb outside your place?
I haven't owned that many bikes. I have a 2015 Indian Scout now.
Okay.
And prior to that, I had a Yamaha Silverado. But before that, it was the Enduro. So those are the only bikes I've owned, but I've ridden dozens and dozens of bikes. So, like I said, when I travel, actually the reason I ended up getting my Indian Scout is I was working on a movie in New Zealand and had a day off. And I was in this little town where there was nothing except for this couple that had a dozen bikes in their garage. And I was like, I want a bike for the day. I want to go out and exploring. And they threw open the thing, and it was just they had, Yamahas and Suzukis and Harleys. And I was like, what's that? I've never ridden anything like that. And it was the bike that I ended up buying.
The Scout.
I had such an amazing ride that day. I came home and I looked for that year, that bike, that make and model, everything.
Nice. Well, you grabbed my follow-up question, which was what attracted you to the Scout. It's almost I have an FTR 1200, which is almost a joke now, because I find a way to mention that on almost every show, because I just love the Indian brand, what they're doing in the US and around the world. But I especially just love the concept of an American-made bike that isn't a Harley-Davidson. I know that I don't mean that as a slam against Harley, but so I've always been fascinated. And you might be the first person I've talked to in I don't know, what is it, 150 some episodes, who is another Indian owner. So I'm excited about that. So what is it? Can you,
what was like, I've been looking at getting, like, I had done a road trip in the past. When I was traveling on another movie, I rented a lowrider for the weekend. And, that felt really good. Like, that fit my body really well. And I liked the weight of it, like going around corners and stuff, for the, shape and size of my body. But like when I rode this Indian Scout, I mean, it literally was like, oh my gosh, somebody designed a bike for me.
For me, yeah.
It was, a good weight, a good height, but it was also just like, I have short legs and like a longer torso, and, it just really matched my shape of body, and it just felt really good. And I also have like a lower back injury from my work in the film industry. And there was something about the positioning of it. And it just, like, I was like pain-free riding that bike.
Nice.
And so, there were just a lot of things that were like, this bike is meant for me, and I had done 300 miles that day, and, it was like a really comfortable seat. I had no, like, particular fatigue from it.
Yeah.
So, like, those are all things that would play in. I was like, oh, that's pretty good. 300 miles. And, it's not designed to be like a long distance cruiser bike, but yet I was really comfortable doing, a fair amount of miles that day for me.
Yeah. Good. Yeah. Well, and little did you know then that you would be setting off on this cross country excursion, and you take the bike you got. So Scout it was.
Right. Yeah.
So let me transition from that into the film. The film that you made, recently put out, is called Women in the Front Seat. And it touches on a lot of different things, which we'll get into. I want to tell you how I came across it, because it just so clearly illustrates one of the points that many of the women in the film made, which was a man on social media griping that it should be women on the front seat. And it just felt so mansplainy, even to me, that I had to go, well, now I'm absolutely watching this movie. And then I found out that Louise Powers, and she connected us together, and here we are. So I'm also curious about how you came about wanting to make, what other kinds of films have you made before? This is, I'm guessing, your first motorcycle film.
It is my first motorcycle film. I gravitate towards making films that, put out into the world, like, the multidimensionality of women. It's definitely an impact statement for me, just to create more representation for women to be seen in complex ways.
Yeah.
And truthful ways, but the majority of my background is narrative films. I'm a camera person by trade. And so I've been shooting for a couple of decades. And I make my passion projects on the side.
Yeah, as many of us do, right?
Yes, exactly.
You pay the bills with the real job, and then you do the stuff that feeds your soul.
Yeah. But this is actually like something I've been kind of trying to make this film for like 10 years. I had pitched it and like around 2010, at a market, because already I was watching statistics changing with the number of women riders growing. And I was like, hey, this is a movement. Like, we should capture this. But I got so much pushback. Like, nobody wanted to make the film I wanted to make. It was like, oh yeah, we could spotlight, those young women who are, coming up in the dirt bike scene. And I was like, yeah, that's cool. But what I really want to make is something about the diverse landscape of women. There's like 50-year-old women who've been on the back of their husbands' bikes for a long time and are learning to ride by, themselves now. And they're like, nah.
There's no market for that. You're a dreamer, kid. Maybe next time. Well, I'm glad you stuck with it, because, I kind of live in a somewhat unique environment, in that I never really had much of a motorcycle community. I didn't really ride with other people or belong to any groups until I had already been riding for a good long time, probably 10 years at least. And I kind of had been around the periphery of the Vintage Japanese Motorcycle Club, but all their events were always far away. So I never, made it to any of that stuff. And then I got my first BMW through a long process, and I found that community. And so from almost the very beginning of my experience in a motorcycle community, I was exposed to a lot of women riders. I don't know, what it is about BMWs and Harleys especially seem to have higher percentage of women riders for some reason. And so, it was normal to me to see a woman on her own motorcycle or on the back seat. It didn't really matter that great to me. So watching your film was kind of a reminder that my experience might have been a little unique, and that's not really the experience for most people. So I was really glad that you highlighted that aspect. The two, and their names are escaping me, but the two women who ride the big Victories, those are just amazingly beautiful bikes. And that's kind of their story. They started on the back and went, nah, that's not going to do it. I got to have my own. And then they went for the biggest bikes that they could find practically, and got the typical. I've heard that story so many times. It's almost not even funny anymore about, well, that's kind of a big bike for you. Don't you think so, young lady? I got that all the time too. I was just going to ask, even with the Scout, which is not a particularly large bike.
No, but I have, like one of the trips that I did was with an ex-boyfriend who was a Harley rider. And he was on his Ultra Glide and I rented a Street Glide, and, we did a long 2,000-mile trip together. We would be somewhere and, some guy would comment on my bike, here's another guy who, he was like, not a big, huge guy. He was like my size.
Yeah.
But yet they weren't like, oh, that's a really big bike for you. But to me, they were like, well, that's a really big bike for you. And I'm like, what? I'm obviously handling it because we're riding together. Right?
Yeah. We're out here in the middle of nowhere talking to you knuckleheads. Right. Yeah. I'm a big dude. I'm 6'2". I'm large framed and just kind of large in all respects. Nobody has ever said that to me. I get kind of the opposite. Do you think that bike's big enough? Actually, a guy blew a sale to me. I was there with cash ready to buy his bike, and he was like, 900 cc's. You think a big boy like you can get by on a bike like that? And I was like, not this one. Take it easy. So, which was the first time I'd ever experienced anything like that. I was kind of taken aback. But that as I was thinking about that later, I feel so fortunate to not be exposed to that as often, simply because I'm not a woman.
Yeah. Yeah. I think people don't realize like how common it is, even when I was riding my Scout across the country, like in Ohio, there was a guy who approached me at a gas station and kind of was like worried that I was by myself, like some stranger. And, it's like pretty, I have found it pretty common that people they underestimate the capacity for me to be a rider, just because of my gender or the way that I look.
Yeah. So how do you respond to those things? Do you brush them off, or do you get into it on the spot?
It depends. Like sometimes I'll just make a joke. With that guy, like he was kind of really innocent about it, and he was just amazed. And I was like, well, I'm actually riding cross country. I started in Boston. I'm going to LA. And like his mouth was like on the floor, so it was like, he's like, I've just never seen anything like this. And I was like, well, there's a lot of us out here, So in that sense, it wasn't like he was trying to be disrespectful. He was really just had no, his worldview just wasn't, didn't have that perspective.
Yeah.
So I was happy to help expand that.
Nice. Yeah. You got a teachable moment there for him.
Yeah. Yeah. So it all depends on like what the circumstance is. I'm happy to have a conversation. I'm happy to share, any of my experiences with somebody if they want to hear it.
Nice.
Sure.
So you said your trip started in Boston and went to LA. How did you start to plan that trip? Because I know taking a trip and using a trip to create content are two very different things. So you had to set up interviews and meetings and all that kind of stuff. What was your process for that? And how did you get your bike to Boston?
I bought it there.
Okay, good.
Yeah, I was working there. I had just finished a film. And the next film that I had been slated to do went away. So all of a sudden I had this gap and I was like, now is the time.
Yep.
You know? And, you know, like just whatever the synergy of the universe, I was like, I'm trying to find this bike. And it just so happened that that exact bike, you know, the same year, 2015 Indy, even had the same saddlebags as the bike I had ridden in New Zealand.
Nice.
Was available at a rental house. Thank you, Mama's Foxborough. You know, they were like so helpful to make it happen for me. It was in their rental division, and they didn't want to sell it, but they finally gave in.
Nice.
You know? So,
nice.
So it was literally like this evolving process. I decided not to I didn't have to hit any certain points. Like the whole goal was to meet other riders who were interested in talking to me and riding with me. Before I did the film, I'd actually never ridden with a woman. You know, I'd only ever ridden with guys. You know, like I said, I work on films, and sometimes on weekends, the guys I'd working with, we'd go out, rent bikes and go out together. But I'd never ridden with a woman before. So the first time, I'd never ridden with a big group.
Right.
So the very first time I did that was in Cohasset with Missy and Teresa and the Women in Wheels group. And they had to teach me the hand signals because I'm like, I don't know what to do. Like, what do you mean? Like, get third and, you know, do this and educate me on that whole thing.
Yeah, I've kind of resisted learning all that stuff. I keep my groups to 4 or 5 and then I don't have to learn it.
Yeah. I mean, it's cool. Like as I was doing it with other groups across the country, that was really a really informing and kind of new, delicious experience in riding. But it was really each of these people that I met that connected me with other people. I did you know, somebody was like, oh, are you going to be in New Mexico? I know some people there. And I'm like, I can be in New Mexico.
I can be, yeah.
You know, you tell me, am I going to New Mexico?
Nice.
But I also had to do some cold, emailing and calling. Like I was in Chicago and I was supposed to go down. I had been talking with the leader of the Carmel Curves group. Mm-hmm. And I was supposed to meet with them on the Sunday. It was Friday. And I call up and I'm like, hey, are you guys ready to meet up on Sunday? And she was like, do you not look at the news? Like there's a hurricane coming. We're being evacuated. And I felt like super shitty because I was like, oh, no, I'm so sorry. But I'd been writing and interviewing for, you know, I'd been on the road a couple of weeks at that point.
Yeah.
And I had not been paying attention to the news or anything outside of my own little, you know, world. And so then I was like, well, what am I going to do? And so then I got on the internet and I found this group in Kansas, which was pretty close to Chicago. And I was like, any chance you guys want to meet up on Sunday? And they were all in. So,
nice.
You know, that's how it was. It was really fluid and kind of really just counted on like who I met and, you know, how it was all rolling along.
Yeah. I was very excited when Wendy Crockett popped up in the film because we're not friends, but I know who she is through the long distance, through the Iron Butt community. And of course, me and all my, you know, motorcycle buddies celebrated her victory in the Iron Butt rally. And it's another one of those things where to us, none of us was surprised that Wendy won because we've all been watching her ride and kick ass in the competition for years. But we forget that I don't want to say we forget she's a woman because we don't. But we forget that that's unusual for a woman to be not just competitive, but to really just to dominate in something like that. And of course, she's been on the podcast. She was a fantastic guest. But I had never seen a picture of her face. the picture she sent me to use for the show, she had a helmet on. So I had never seen her whole face, just her eyes. So it was really cool to get a look at her to see what she looked like finally, to kind of put a full face with the voice. So I was very excited. And then that just made me feel that much more connected to the whole film in general. And I want to tell you how much I appreciated the variety of guests that you had. You know, you had straight women, you had gay women, you had white women, black women, yourself, which is kind of neither. It was just we forget sometimes how diverse the motorcycling community is, because a lot of us just see the straight white aspect of it, kind of the masculine white male, thing. So that was one of the things that I really took away from the film, was that big reminder that it's not just women creating diversity in motorcycling. It's far, far more diverse and widespread than just that.
Yeah. And I mean, I did want to have, representation in the film, but I have to say, like, it wasn't like I was like, I didn't seek it out. Like, right. Literally, the women that I met were the women that were connected to me by the other women.
Yeah.
So it's also, and there's women in it from the age of like 22 to 72. And to me, like, on that journey itself, like, that was as surprising to me. Like, I couldn't believe who I was meeting. And I was like, boy, this community is bigger than I realized.
Did that help you did you change the idea behind women in the front seat as you went along, as you gathered more experiences? Did the idea of what you wanted for the film change?
Yeah. I mean, when I started out, I literally thought I was just going to be doing, I would come across a handful of women, and I thought I was going to do a short web series that was more like profile pieces, like, meet so-and-so, look how cool this is.
Right.
And as I was writing and after I started to hear these different, some of their stories, and like, they started to interweave in my head, in the film, Allison talks about like the helmet time. That kind of became my helmet time,
Yeah.
Like these long stretches I'm riding. I'm like, I don't think this is a profile piece anymore. Like, I think this is something like bigger and more integrated and delves into like deeper themes about who we are as people. And it was like even evolving, like after I filmed everything and I started to sit down with, I went through a few different editors in the process, and did some feedback screenings, and it was like constantly evolving to find out like, what is the heart of this that is, so compelling that, needs to be shared.
Yeah. So what were some of the commonalities that connected these women writers together? For people that haven't seen the film yet, it's easy to find. It's on Amazon. It's $10 to buy it. You can rent it for, I think, for $3.50. And it's 75-ish minutes long. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So, it's long enough that you can watch it and then you're not too tired to talk about it with the people that you've watched it with. So did those things kind of start stitching together because let me back up a little bit. Podcasts are pretty simple. Podcasts are very linear, right? This episode that you're on, opened up with a news segment, and then we came right on here and we're talking straight through, and I'm not moving things around to make them make sense or anything like that. But when you make a movie, especially a documentary like this, where you're incorporating a lot of different people, you don't just have one person talk and then the next person talk and then the next person. You don't kind of put your people linearly. So it's a little bit in the weeds, it's a little technical, but how did you decide how to put the things together thematically? Because that's kind of what drives the film, is the different ideas and then the women that are talking about them. Yeah.
I mean, I had an idea of the flow, and I guess it loosely comes down to like, what was the impetus to want to ride? How did you overcome any obstacles? What obstacles were there, and then the reward at the end,
Yeah.
But of course that's very broad. But it does sort of have that trajectory, some of the obstacles being, the crashes and, how that affected, and what transpired for the women during stuff like that. You know.
That's a brutal fellowship to be part of, but it's an important one because, you look, any crowd of motorcyclists, they all know somebody who's died on a motorcycle. They all know somebody who's been, grievously injured or even maimed on a motorcycle, lost a limb, something like that. But I forget which of the women said it. When you have a car crash, you get back in a car.
Yeah.
And I know so many people that have had really terrible crashes, and they, like me, I mean, mine wasn't that bad. Broken leg. It's not that, I'm probably downplaying it a little bit, but, I wasn't really messed up, but I got right back on the bike and people were dumbfounded.
Yeah.
And one of the folks that's in the movie, she was messed up really bad. Like even I had to pause for a second and kind of collect myself to go on when they showed her x-rays, because some of her x-rays looked like mine, and it really kind of flashed me back to that instance. So have you had a crash experience of your own that you kind of were able to connect through that on?
I know I never was injured.
Okay.
I have had some scary moments, and I did, it wasn't like a crash, but I did have a bike like at night in the rain pull out like right in front of me, and I did like slide down the road, but
that's a crash. You just didn't get hurt.
Right. It was a crash.
Yeah, that's a real crash. That counts.
That's a real crash. But yeah, I didn't break anything or puncture anything. And, luckily it was a road where there was nobody else there. So nothing was coming to hit me or anything like that.
Yeah.
Which was, I was extremely lucky. But yeah, I've known, like we all have, people who've been, not survived crashes and badly injured. And, I think, that's part of like, I wanted the film to speak to the passion and the power of what riding means to people, and in that there's like so much inspiration, like I'm just blown away by, what people go through and continue to ride. And, it's just like so, deep, in our souls. So
yeah,
that's what's important to talk about.
Yeah. So if you weren't a rider for life before you met all these people, you probably are now, huh?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's kind of cool. Like, I did the festival circuit with the film before it came out on Amazon, and I had both men and women come up to me afterwards being like, I'm going to go check out riding, like,
nice.
I'm happy that it doesn't, that it motivates people to, possibly explore something new.
Yeah. And let me actually, now that you mentioned it, let me ask you a little bit. And I know that there's probably business stuff in there that you can't or don't want to talk about, and that's fine. But what's the process like to get something on Amazon like that as an independent filmmaker? Is it like, does it take a long time? Is it really difficult? I have literally no concept of how a film goes from, you finished it and now I get to buy it and watch it on Amazon. What was that process like for you?
Yeah. I think it's different for different people. It was my first film. So, I know like before I did the festival circuit, I was trying to hire a publicist, and they were like, there's nothing to publicize, they're like, maybe if you win an award, call us back.
Yeah.
Like everybody's like, get people on board early, find a distributor early. But nobody would even look twice at me because there was nothing to show, I guess.
Right. You're just Indy with the motorcycle movie.
Exactly. And, but luckily I had a successful festival run, and it did win, the best documentary award at a number of them, and audience awards. And so, I think in my own case, I think that helped me to legitimize me a little bit, and the film a little bit. And so, and I also met other filmmakers who saw the film and liked it, who already like had gotten distribution and knew people. And so those connections started to happen. And, one festival that I was at, if you got the best feature doc award, you automatically got connected to a distributor.
Nice.
And that happened. So, and then they gave me an offer, because ultimately you can't just go, unless you already have a relationship with Amazon or one of the streaming people, you can't just go and, talk to them.
Right. There's no you can't just show up at Amazon's office and say, here's my film.
You can't. There has to be like somebody who, has a relationship with them. And that's, often a distributor or a sales agent.
Right.
So, that was the person that I was trying to find. Like I was trying to find a distributor who, thought the film was worthy. And so I'm luckily, I through a few different means, like I did attend the American Film Market, which is an opportunity to meet a lot of different distributors. And I did get some offers for the film and picked one, and they're the ones who got it on Amazon.
Nice. Oh, so there was a middle step between you and Amazon. It wasn't like Amazon showed up at your door and you handed over a hard drive and that was it. Okay. No. That makes a little bit more sense in my mind, because
and all of these different distributors have relationships with, different broadcasters and streaming platforms. And
so if you had gone with a different distributor, it might have ended up on Netflix for say, instead of Amazon, that kind of thing. That makes sense. And if you don't mind, I want to keep asking some technical questions, because I don't make films, I make videos, which is a completely different thing. But I'm always trying to improve my game, because I think my videos are like, I go for educational and instructive and informative, but I think a lot of them just suck from a filmmaking point of view. So talk to me a little bit about your gear that you took on this trip with you. What kind of cameras did you use? How did you track and catalog your footage so that you could effectively edit when you were done?
Well, I'm a little bit of a sidebar person, I guess, on that, because I'm a camera person first.
Right.
I've been a camera person for 20 years and cinematographer, and shot a lot of stuff. And I work with like really nice cameras, and I'm sort of a snob when it comes to like, it's got to have so many Ks and it's got to have so much like latitude. And so I didn't make the film with a documentary camera. Like I got a cinema camera.
Right.
It's not the easy, but like I really wanted to, because the look of the film was really important to me. And because I know already how to use all of that equipment. Yeah. So it was a fast thing for me to utilize, even though it wasn't necessarily the best choice for a run and gun situation.
Gotcha.
I would get somewhere and they'd be like, we're ready. And I'm like, I'm still putting the lens on. I'll be right with you.
Click, click, whir, click, click, click.
Yeah.
Hold on a second. Nobody say anything fun.
I'm almost ready.
So what was the camera that you took with you?
So I took the Canon C200,
okay.
Which is like, it's a middle grade. It's like a prosumer camera.
Right.
But it still can have like nice cinema lenses on it, and, it was in 4K and I was able to shoot it raw. So I had just a lot of material to work with in the edit, both in terms of, just the look of it. And, I knew I also wasn't going to be able to like control a lot about it. So I wanted the camera to do a lot of the work for me.
Yeah. So how did you manage to pack that rig? Because the Scout is a very capable motorcycle. It's got a couple of saddlebags, but they're not huge. So how did you pack that gear along with, you got to have clothes and rain gear and, et cetera, et cetera. How'd you get all that stuff on your bike?
Yeah, I ended up just getting like it wasn't even that large. It was like a medium-sized case that I just attached to the sissy in the back, and then just had, and all of my camera stuff. I had 2 cameras and 2 lenses, and 3 lavalier microphones, and a small, like tiny, like LED lighting kit, and that all went in that case. And then the saddlebags, I had like my motorcycle stuff, rain gear, et cetera, et cetera. And then all of my clothes went in a tank bag. So I had what I was wearing and 2 changes. And I was like, that's just what it has to be, because I don't need the clothes.
Yeah.
I could just wear the same thing ultimately and just wash it at night. Yeah. But I do need the camera stuff.
Well, yeah, because you're on the backside of the camera, so nobody really sees what you're wearing throughout the film.
Exactly.
So, sorry.
It was really like, it's a lesson. I mean, I had a lot more stuff, and I was packing the bike, and I was meant to leave that day, and I had so much extra stuff. Like, I had to postpone my leaving day by a day because I had to ship stuff home, and I was like, I don't know what I was thinking.
Well, you know what? I think that's a really common experience. I do that. I constantly, anytime I go out on a trip, I end up mailing stuff home because I'm like, why did I bring this? I don't need this. I'm not going to need it. And never once, not once in 25-ish years of riding have I needed something and either not been able to find somebody who has one or go buy one at Walmart or CVS, or a motorcycle shop. So, I've never missed any of that stuff.
Exactly. I know it wasn't like I was going to be somewhere so remote that I couldn't, pick up whatever I might have forgotten or didn't bring.
So how did you manage all of your footage? Because I don't know anything about like quote real movie cameras, right? But I imagine we're talking big files. Big file. How do you manage all that stuff?
Yeah, it was a lot of data. And, I mean, in a lot of ways, it was really silly. It was just this, like, I just come off this big movie, and to be honest, I felt a pressure to, I felt this need to make it, try to make it look as good as the people that I work with.
Right.
So I probably went a little overboard, because it really wasn't the right tool, because it wasn't easy to shoot like that. But so I was shooting in 4K. And so I was carrying like 15 terabytes worth of drives with me.
Oh.
Yes.
Wow.
And so, I'm riding during the day, and then I'm filming, and then I'm going back to my, I stayed in hotels most of the time. I did a little bit of camping, but, I needed the,
electricity
and the beds and the space and everything. And so I would set it all up to offload. I'd have to offload part of it before going to sleep, and then the rest of it I would offload overnight, but it would take hours.
Yeah.
Because, I think it was like 1 hour video was, almost a terabyte of footage. Yeah, it was just massive, and it was a lot to wrangle. And I'm not doing another one like that.
Well, usually we learn how to do things in a way that works, and then based on the lessons we learn from that process, we learn how to do it more efficiently the next time and the next time and the next time.
Yes, for sure. I learned a lot of lessons.
Well, the important thing is, from a creative standpoint, you got the film out that you saw in your head. And, so next time, now you know how to take some shorter steps to get there. So maybe, you won't have to worry about going to sleep while your computer is humming, that kind of thing. So when you were with all that footage, when you got back and you were ready to start editing, did you come across stuff that you had forgotten about, or that kind of maybe not forgotten about, but didn't seem as important at the time, but then once you started putting it together, took on new importance?
Yeah. I mean, I think, definitely like some key things that people said just stuck in my brain.
Yeah.
But there were all kinds of like just beautiful morsels, as I went back, and, I had it I transcribed it, and just came across all kinds of other great little tidbits. And also once, like the final edit was done by a documentary, like a personal documentary editor. I found her and I was like, I really need somebody to help structure this.
Yeah.
And, you know, she came on board and just really took it to the next level.
Nice.
And once she was in there, then I, you know, and was like reshaping some of the stuff, I was like, oh, I know what can go there. And, you know, then it was like going back into the treasure trove and pulling stuff out.
Yeah. So how long from the time that you finished, from the end of the trip, because theoretically by the time you got to LA, you were done filming. And then how long was it until the film was ready for people to see it in its final version? Because you said you went through some test prints and things like that. So what was that time span?
That time span was 4.5 years.
Wow.
Yeah. But also there was a break in there because
COVID.
I had the rough cut done and I had done a feedback screening in January of 2020. And then COVID hit and then it was really like a standstill for a while for many reasons.
Yeah.
So I would drop a year out of there. Like if COVID hadn't happened, like there would have been a lot more, like there would have been more momentum because it was literally like stop everything.
Yeah. I have a few friends in the movie industry, in the film and television industry, and, you know, they were suddenly unemployed. You know, it was really tough for them. Yeah.
Yeah. I was, definitely suddenly unemployed.
Yeah.
And I did do a crowdfunding campaign, and, you know, had a couple other people, you know, want to contribute, but it was mostly self-funded. So when I wasn't working, I couldn't pay for it.
Right. So, I know as somebody who, was fortunate enough to have the time and resources to pursue an advanced academic degree, one of the questions that I answer a lot, it gets the answer, no, not that kind of doctor. So as a filmmaker, do people ask you all the time, well, have you worked on anything I would know?
Yes.
So have you worked on it besides Women in the Front Seat, which I know because I have a copy? Have you worked on anything else that I would know of in the world?
Yeah. As my, my trade job, which is a DIT, digital imaging technician. I worked on The Little Mermaid live action, which is coming out, I think, this summer.
Yeah.
So that's pretty exciting. But I worked on Gemini Man with Will Smith.
Okay. Yeah.
Jerry Bruckheimer action film. I worked on the third one of the Pirates of the Caribbean.
Okay.
So
I've seen both of those.
People usually have seen those,
Yeah.
or heard of them at least. Let's see. What are some of the Wrinkle in Time?
Okay. Yeah. Cool.
Was another big one. Patriots. What was that called? Patriots. Patriots game. The Boston Marathon bombing movie.
Oh yeah, yeah, with one of the Wahlbergs.
Yeah, with Mark Wahlberg.
Yeah.
So those are the big name ones.
Yeah, well, and I assume that probably like most of us, most of the stuff you do doesn't really hit that level of, you know, kind of popular consumption because there's so many more films that come out every year than people are exposed to.
Yeah. In the same time that I did Gemini Man, I worked on two films that I was like super proud to be a part of. One was Harriet, which is an amazing film, but didn't get a lot of marketing about Harriet Tubman and like her whole story. And then another one was Dark Waters, which is like a sort of an indie New York filmmaker, but it's all about the DuPont chemical poisoning of like their like the toxic chemical poisoning.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And it's, you know, it's been a huge thing in and out of the news for 25 years. And that movie also just didn't get a lot of media, which I could probably guess why.
Yeah. But somebody might have had their thumb on the scale on that one.
Exactly.
I remember seeing the previews for that though, and I thought, well, I better go see that the weekend it comes out because it's not going to stay in theaters very long. And I think it ended up then being during COVID, and I never got to see it. But yeah, I know what you're talking about. So with folks in your industry, my industry as well, you're only as good as your last project. Your last project is fantastic. So what's next for you? Has Women in the Front Seat started to open some doors for you?
Yeah, I have a few things in the works. I'm working with a couple other women on an anthology series that brings into light a lot of the lost heroes of that, women who've done all kinds of important things over the course of history. So it's about bringing all of those stories to light. But I'm also starting to film my next documentary just next month, which I'm super excited about. I have a friend who is a mover and shaker in terms of affecting and changing women's lives. She started a literacy program at the women's prison near where she is, but her key focus is in around the world of human trafficking. And she's speaking at the UN next month at their annual event, they have it's called the Commission on the Status of Women.
Okay.
And it goes for 2 weeks at the UN every March. And she's been to speak many times. And so this year I'm going to go and film all of that's going on and start putting together a documentary about what's going on in America in terms of human trafficking and how we can make a difference.
Yeah. Are you gonna ride out? I don't recommend it. March in upstate, in crossing that part of the country to get to New York City, probably not the best time to do that. Yeah,
no, definitely not. And trying to pack camera gear on the bike once was enough. That's definitely not a route I want to do again.
Yeah. Well, that's awesome. And I want to encourage people to that have access to Amazon Prime to go check it out. It's called Women in the Front Seat. But where else can folks find the film online? Do you have like an Instagram account for the film or for your own media pursuits or anything like that?
Yeah, it's on Facebook. It's Women in the Front Seat, and also Instagram, Women in the Front Seat. And there's a website, same title. So there's information about it all over. And it is going to start rolling out onto some other platforms. I think it should be coming out on Google Play.
Cool.
In the next month, and some other streaming options yet to.
Cool. Keep whipping that distributor.
Exactly.
Well, I wish we could keep talking because, from watching the documentary, there's some photos of your family, and I'm very curious about your upbringing. Kind of as a child caught between cultures, a little bit different than certainly my experience. I grew up in a military family, which is its own culture, and we all have our unique experiences. So I wish I could keep going, but I know your time is at a premium and we've all got things that we need to get done. But I want to thank you for giving me some of your time to talk about the film and your life and your motorcycle. And I really, really appreciate it. Indy, thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was really a pleasure. And, I loved being able to talk to you.
Visit our website at chasingthehorizon.us to listen to every episode of the podcast and read up on various motorcycle-related topics. The best way you can support Chasing the Horizon is by joining the BMW Motorcycle Owners of America. Yes, it says BMW right in the name, but we absolutely do not care what bike you ride. We know what's most important. The MOA is all about the community of riders, not a single brand. Each membership supports digital offerings like Chasing the Horizon, the Ride Inside with Mark Barnes, and everything else the MOA does. Find out more at bmwmoa.org. And ride along with us on the internet. Chasing the Horizon is on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. There's a mailing list with exclusive content and giveaways that are only open to subscribers. You can sign up for that at tinyletter.com/chasingthehorizon. We'll see you out there somewhere on the road or off it. Ride safe.